My name is Derek Brown, and I am a senior identity and security engineer with the Lincoln Financial Group. First thing I'd like to do is thank everybody for coming to this session today. Hopefully I can show you another cool tool to throw in your toolbox that follows the theme of a lot of the automation and scripting pieces we've seen from others so far during this conference. And I also want to give a shout out to whoever put the schedule together, because I'm going to be covering some very similar ground to what we just saw in the last session. I'm just going to be doing it in PowerShell. So with that in mind, let's talk about how we can forget the GUI and embrace the shell. And of course, the first thing is first, I got to give my little disclaimer, say I warned you, I've got witnesses. When I first wrote this module, it was very specific to certain use cases at my company. I've done my best since I published it to go and sanitize it, make it more generic. This is just a warning. Some of the things in here might not work perfectly in your environments because it started out as something tailored to mine. All right, so now that I've sufficiently warned you, let's go through some of the setup stuff that you got to do first and highlight some of the features that I think I bring to the table. First thing, I've got those links there where you can see this project on my GitHub page and also download it from the PowerShell gallery. I will be sharing those later today in the API channel on Discord, so if you're curious, keep an eye out for those. Onto some of the features. First thing is this module does not have any config files at all. I know that's something that's pretty common for modules in PowerShell related to SaaS tools, but I've skipped that step. I support easily switching between tenants, kind of like we saw with the last demo for the new SailPoint CLI. My search commands have some predefined search criteria, so there's parameters that you can use to pass some common identity properties through. They probably won't work in all cases, but for those of you who can use them, they're there. And lastly, the favorite thing that I've added most recently are classes. These will help build the more complicated structured objects. We've been seeing a lot on transforms because there's a lot that can go into building those. And I've done my best to start automating that for you by giving you parameters to build an object so you don't have to write it all out yourself. I know I personally hated doing that. All right. So the first thing that I got to tell you about is how to set your org names. That is done via a script that will run every time this module is imported. It checks to see if they are there. I use environmental variables to set those, so they're probably, and by that I mean definitely, not going to be present the first time you download this thing. So the script is going to kick off. Kick off. It's going to prompt you to enter the value of your production and your sandbox tenants. And then after that, each time you import the module, it'll just confirm that they're still there. And if so, you won't even see it. Authentication, right now, the only method that I support is using a personal access token. I definitely need to add that to my to-do list that's at the end of this presentation to support more options, but right now it's just simply that. You will run the get ID and token command. You do not have to cast this to a variable. It will return creating the variable in your current session. The way that's done is through the tenant selection. Each function has a parameter at the end. It's called instance, and the only two valid values you can pass are production and sandbox. The default is production, so if you want to connect to your production tenant, you don't have to do anything. It's already set, but if you are wanting to hit your sandbox instead, you will need to toggle that. And then the behavior that controls for the get token command is it'll create a different variable based on whether you selected production and sandbox. And then all the subsequent calls for searching identities, submitting transforms, getting roles, sources, etc. will choose the variable in your session based on the instance parameter. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Now that I've gotten a lot of the boring stuff out of the way, let's start talking about what this module can do to hopefully make your lives easier for those of you PowerShell people out there. All right. First thing, let's talk about running some searches. Like I said, I've got some canned options that are based on parameters. Those are pretty common attributes, first name, last name, email, the domain of the email address, lifecycle states for identities. I realize schemas are going to vary, so maybe you use given name instead of first name or just first, so these probably won't work for everybody, like I said. And this isn't going to cover every possible search, so each one also has a query parameter where you can submit your own search query and just write it out yourself. So if your schema doesn't match or what you're looking for is not supported, you're still good. I also use parameter sets to help get you into a bit of a search issue where you're trying to search for items that return bulk users versus specific users. So you can't search for all identities in a source and an email, someone with a specific email address at the same time. And here are just some screenshots showing off an example of some pretty basic searches. I just kind of looked for myself. You can see by my first and last name, which is very common. I'm at a big company, found 2 people. And then the custom version, you can see it written out in traditional search syntax, but I'm a pretty lazy guy. I prefer passing parameters whenever possible. And then down there, it's probably not quite as easy to see because it's a little bit smaller, but I've got a canned search for events, which kind of like our last session, allows you to kind of set a time frame. I just went with hours instead of days, but that's something that I can always add support for in a later update. And again, there's the longer version of it. And the big reason I'm a fan of these kind of canned searches is because I can never remember the syntax for time-based searches. I don't know why, but I have to look it up every time. So now I don't. All right. Next, I want to talk about creating transforms because we have not heard enough about that from other presenters so far. This is a 2-step process. First, there is a initialize function, which uses switch parameters to select what kind of a transform operation you are executing. The options you will be presented will change based on the type of operation. They're not all in there yet, but if you are, anything that is required for that particular transform operation will be a mandatory parameter, and the function will not execute unless you have something there. And then once you are happy with the transform you've built, you will use the new transform rule command, because I have a goofy name for some reason, to send the transform to your IdentityNow tenant. The reason this is a 2-stage process is, A, this is kind of a new concept, so this way you can convert it to JSON with that commandlet and make sure that you've got what you want set, or got everything set correctly, so you don't send something through that might break your tenants. Another reason is some transforms, like first valid or lookups, for example, you're going to have to stack multiple ones on top of each other. So you're probably going to have to initialize the transform more than once to get everything settled. And also, there's not support for this yet, but as others have discussed, sometimes you have to nest transform operations, grab an attribute from one source and then do some string manipulation on it. So this 2-step process should hopefully make it easy to run a few commands, dynamically build your transform, and then submit it once you're done. And here on this screen, I've kind of got a basic example of how this would look. Sorry for the backticks. I know that's kind of an old school way of doing things, but I wanted the screenshots to fit. So this is a pretty basic one, just finding someone's, this transform would essentially find and set somebody's work email as an identity attribute. So I've got the name of the rule, which is pretty universal and always required, the source ID to pull from, which is obviously fake, but I do have a requirement that it must be 32 characters long because that's the current character length for source IDs. And you will get an error if you don't have exactly 32 characters, as you can see in the oops bubble over there on the right. You have to tell it what account attribute you're looking for. And then for this, I went ahead and threw in an account property filter because users like us who can be IT admins are probably going to have multiple accounts. We don't want to throw in an administrator ID that probably doesn't even have an email address, period. And you can kind of see the structure that it builds. It's got the attributes, the type, the name, and then I printed out the attribute table as well. Now that you've got a transform, odds are you're going to want to use it with an identity attribute somewhere. So I also have a class for creating new identity attributes and submitting those. It is also a 2-stage process, very similar, parameter sets, allow you to select the type of identity attribute you are adding, and you only see the relevant options. And then add identity profile attribute to submit them. You can submit more than one, which is again why this is a two-step process. So if you got to create a bunch, you can run the initialize command over and over and then submit them all at the same time with a single add call. And this is a pretty basic one that is a referencing an account attribute using the transform from the previous example. And I went ahead and converted that one to JSON so you can kind of see how the class does convert nicely to what SailPoint would, IdentityNow would expect you to be submitting. Another cool thing that I believe I have in here is a command to update dynamic role criteria. These are things that are going to change from time to time, and JSON patches are a very specific structure. I know I struggle with them, so that's one reason that I have these in here. One thing I want to note is this command is not a two-step process. If you run this, it is just going to create and send the new criteria for your role right on through. So make sure you've got it right before you press enter. I have validate sets for like type and operation, so you can't submit an invalid value for that. And as I said earlier, this will actually just submit it. I modified the code for demonstration purposes only to show you what it creates. Again, you can see here, there how it's just going to add it to the very end, because I really don't think it matters so much where dynamic role criteria is, but I could be wrong on that, and we'll have to address that later. But for now, it just goes to the bottom. And as you can see, I'm a Seinfeld fan with blah.yada as my email domain. All right, a few other cool features that I think I've got in here that can be time savers for everyone. The get ID and role command has an option to expand out the access profiles. By default, it pretty much just returns a hash table that has the name and ID of the access profile. But usually if I'm digging into those, I want to see what kind of entitlements are coming through and maybe who the owner is. So there's a switch that you can specify that will expand access profiles and replace that basic table with the full details of each individual access profile. The get identity attributes command creates a index column for you. So if you are trying to update or submit a new identity attribute, you're not sure exactly where to insert it, you can run this command against source or identity profile, and it'll list out the numeric position of each existing attribute, so you can easily find the number for where you need to insert your new one. And then kind of the last thing is the set ID and role criteria command. I personally think this is a cool idea. I'm just not sure how well it would work outside of my organization, because my strategy here was to use switch parameters that would list all the available dynamic roles in your tenant, and then the options you would see would be specific to how to update those. So I had a project recently where we had to create a whole bunch of new email accounts for our sales reps. So the criteria was, if their email domain equals this, create them an account. And I was sometimes adding 50 of those at a time. So this made it pretty easy for me to just pass a list of email domains and update that role. But obviously, every single time this module would be installed, this would get blown away and reset to just kind of the basic example that I have in there now. So I left it in there because I think it's kind of a cool concept for working with dynamic roles, but not something that could ever be generalized for the public use, so to speak. So it may disappear, it may not. I think it's cool. Let me know in the API Discord if you think I'm crazy or not. Some kind of planned features that I have on my to-do list but aren't in here yet are finishing transform operations. Like I said, this is a new update to the module. I haven't done all of them, just a handful, so I definitely want to finish building that out. and add support for nesting transforms, because sometimes you're going to be pulling an attribute and needing to change how it's displayed. I also need to finish building out search functions. Right now, I just have one, excuse me, one specific to identities and events. For everything else, I have the search ID in custom command. It's nothing too crazy. It works pretty similar to the existing search commands. It's just here you have to specify the index you are searching for and then pass a custom query, and it'll just return those results. I just went ahead and, for demo purposes, ran the one I did previously looking for me, and you can see that it found the same two results that it did the first time around. Dynamic roles, like I said, I've got a function here that you can easily create new dynamic role criteria and add it to an existing role, but maybe you need to remove existing criteria or change existing criteria. So I will definitely add support for removing and modifying existing criteria, but right now all you can do is add. And sources. I would love to have something to create a new source and go through all the connection or attributes, but that is a daunting task and just not something I've been able to sit down and devote the time to. I know it would be a massive, or could be a massive time saver for a lot of people, and maybe help you enforce some structure in how you set up sources. It's on the to-do list. It's not near the top of the to-do list because, like I said, that is something that's going to take quite a bit of time. And lastly, I think we've all seen the emails lately, and we're probably on the calls yesterday where they talked about deprecating the legacy API in versions and their private versions. So I definitely need to do an audit, which I'm already long overdue for anyway, and get rid of all the legacy endpoints and get them updated with v3 or beta endpoints where possible. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'm going to get a little risky here and try and do a live demo because of some things I saw in the chat yesterday surrounding identity refreshes. That's not something I put in my specific feature list. I apologize for that. I thought there was already some stuff out there in the community for it, but I'm having trouble finding it, so I probably should have. I've already got a token grabbed, and this is pretty simple. It is just start identity refresh. The only thing you have to pass is the alias or account name of the identity you want to refresh. I'm going to go ahead and put in mine. I've done this enough that I actually have it memorized. And then real quick before I run this, I kind of want to show you that there are two bool parameters that you can specify provisioning roles and refreshing entitlements. By default, these are set to true because odds are if you're doing an identity refresh, this is something you're probably going to want to be doing anyway. But since I don't actually have any changes that need done, I'm going to go ahead and just mark these both false to do it pretty quick and basic. And if the command runs successfully, it's going to return the alias of the user that you refreshed with the basic status update that it was successful. If it fails, because maybe you've got a stale token or something, you're just going to get whatever error message is kicked back by the system. I know that was something that got brought up on the Discord yesterday, so hopefully that will be helpful to some people. If there are any questions, comments, criticisms, I can pull up the Discord on my phone and go ahead and throw out your questions, and I'll take a few minutes to answer them because I think I still got 5-10 minutes left on my slot. not seeing anything pop up, so I'm going to go ahead and demo the script I was talking about for setting your environmental variables. Just give me a minute. I'm going to clear mine. Oops, sorry. Wrong window. Actually, you know what? All right, so hopefully I've got my session reset and see if this works. Oop. All right, so yeah. Because this is prompting you for input, if you haven't set these variables already on your own, odds are commands won't autocomplete until you manually run the import module command, in which case you'll get the warning that you are missing one or more of the environmental variables necessary for this module to run. It is going to prompt you for which scope you like to create them in, whether you want to set it as just your user or in your system as a whole. I'm not running as an admin, so I'm just going to go with number 1 for user. And then I'm just going to enter in some fake names for prod, and then sandbox. Then if I close this out, oop, crap. I usually use the terminal, so autopilot. There we go. So that time it didn't prompt me because they're already set, but unfortunately I can't run any commands because that doesn't actually exist. So do one more check to see if any questions came in, and if not, I will go ahead and give everybody some time back, get the break started early. Everybody can get some lunch. Yeah, my bad. All right. Well, once again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to my session. Sorry I sped through it a little faster. This is the first time I've ever presented at a conference like this, so my nerves got the better of me a tad bit. Thanks again. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show.